Because there's a difference between saying, I am a loser and I lost, or I failed versus I am a failure.
And try to create this bubble. And this bubble is a failure-free zone.
Yes.
And we try to put the circumstances or change the circumstances for our kids so that they'll never experience failure.
Right. Being a parent is a high calling and it's deeply rewarding. I'm your host, Natalie Mann. I'm a mom of 6, so I know firsthand how challenging parenting can be. Welcome to Rooted Parenting. I'm here to help you to honor God as a parent and to raise your kids to know and to love Jesus. Today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about failure and how we can coach our kids through failing. And my guest today is Erik Fry. Erik is the athletic director here at SPH Lippo Village. Erik, I'm really excited that you're here with us today, and I wonder if you can start by just telling us about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been here at SPH Lippo Village for 6 years. I worked at SPH Kemang Village for 3 years before that. So lived in Indonesia now. This is our 9th year here. We have 3 kids, a grade 4, a grade 2, and a K3. I've been coaching basketball ever since I've been out of college. And so I think 14 or 15 years now. Wow. And I've been athletic director here all 6 years that I've been at this campus. And so, yeah, here we are.
Awesome. Yeah, I thought the fact that you're an athletic director and a dad means that you have a little more experience, I would think, than most with the concept of failure and, kids who have a game, doesn't go well, and, how you walk them through that. And one of my funny memories of my youngest son, Mark, is that when we lived in Central, we had just soccer. It was a very casual soccer. There was a coach, but it's maybe 5, 6 kids, not a lot of kids, playing soccer, learning basic skills. And I would go and watch, and they'd do it for maybe an hour after school. And this one time, I was kind of preoccupied chatting with a friend, but at the end, I thought something kind of weird had happened. So walking home, I said to Mark, "Hey, Mark, what happened on the field?" And he said, "What?" I said, "Well, I feel like something changed." He said, "Oh, yeah, I went to my coach and asked if I could switch teams." I said, "Why?" He said,
"Because the other team was winning."
My team was losing.
Of course.
I thought it was so hilarious because I feel like, maybe that's a very normal human instinct. We all have it. It's like, if I'm losing, I would much rather know what it's like to be on the other side and on the other team. And kind of comical that was his response. And I mean, he magically got to do it, but typically that doesn't happen. So,
it's true. To that, I'll say winning feels good. Succeeding feels good. And the world demands success from us and our parents sometimes, and our teachers and our coaches. And so I think it's only natural for Mark in that situation. It doesn't feel as good to be on the losing team. It feels so much better to be on the winning side. So that's a fun story.
Yeah. And then I think about, as a parent, how at least I know that I've had moments where I felt like if I can help my child avoid failure, I would be really glad to do that, right? In fact, there are certain circumstances that I'd prefer not to watch my child go through because it might involve failure and it might be very disappointing. And, as a parent, you feel all those emotions.
Yeah, definitely. Kids. Yeah, I think it's a hard balance to strike. Some parents, or sometimes even all of us as parents, will build these walls and try to create this bubble. And this bubble is a failure-free zone. Yes. And we try to put the circumstances or change the circumstances for our kids so that they'll never experience failure.
Right.
And I think, balanced on the other side with, watching and knowing maybe a failure is coming and, trying to give our kids good advice and maybe help them prepare, but then not being so overbearing to build that bubble or build those walls because there's so much that can be learned through failure.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy balance. And I know you know that, and I know that as well.
Yeah. We
want our kids to do well. Yeah. We want our kids to succeed. And we know from our own experiences that success feels good.
Yeah.
Failure doesn't feel as good. Failure is disappointing.
Yeah.
And so, trying to strike that balance, as a dad and as a coach, I have seen the lessons that can be learned through failure, but I will never try to set my own kids up for failure. No. I'm not going to let them fail on purpose or give them bad advice so that they fail.
Yes.
And the same thing with the teams that I've coached, right? I'm going to prepare them as best I know how and expect that they prepare themselves so that when the trial comes, when the game comes, whatever it is, the test comes, the project at school comes, they are on the pathway towards success. But even the harder, as hard as we try as parents, as coaches, our kids will fail.
They will.
We will fail as parents. And so it's such a hard balance, I think, trying to help our kids to succeed, but also, not building that bubble, that perfectly failure-free zone. So
yeah, and it's kind of that piece of advice, like, parents, let your kids fail. That's a hard statement to even make because, like you said, you don't want to set them up for failure, but you also know that failure will come. So you want them to be well prepared. So I wonder if you can talk about a time when maybe one of your own kids did experience some form of failure and then how you walk them through that.
Yeah. I can think of a very recent example. We had our soccer carnival yesterday, right? So my oldest son, Will, he's playing for the grade 3-4 boys group. And, I'm watching him and cheering him on, his dad, of course, and trying to encourage him. And he's playing defender back there. And so, his job is to make sure the ball doesn't get through. If he's doing a really great job, the goalkeeper doesn't have much to do because he's, and so, I end up, their very first match, I think they lost 3-1, right? So it was 1-1 for a long time. And then toward the end of the game, 2 more goals came in. Yeah. And so after the game, hey, Will, I love to watch you play. Yeah. Great job. Yeah. But Dad, we lost. Of course, like a lot of times that's the very first thing that our kids will tell us if we ask, how did the game go? Yeah. Right? We won. Yeah. Yay. That's all that matters. Yeah. We lost. Right. And so a lot of times, even when I'm asking my own son or other kids, when I see them the next day at school, if they had an away game, I will actually try to be intentional, not to say, hey, who won? But hey, how'd the game go? Or how'd you play yesterday? Yeah. How'd the team do? How did the team play? So anyway, yesterday with Will, but we lost. But Will, did you give your best effort? Yeah. Well, yeah, of course I did, but we still lost, right? And I think that's, we'll probably talk about this more as this podcast goes, but, what is failure? In a sense, Will's team yesterday, they failed because they didn't win, right? But then on an individual level and even a team level, like, did Will's crocodile wolf teammates give their very best effort for the entire game? And if they did and still ended up losing, is that really a failure? Yes. On what scale, And so anyway, that was a more recent example. And I think, my advice to Will is, listen, you've got 2 more games. Pick yourself up, right? Live to fight another battle, live to see another day. And, oh yeah, that's right, I still have 2 more games, right? So what are you and your teammates going to do? Can you talk with your teammates? Can you have a team huddle before the game? Yeah. Is there anything you could do differently strategy wise? Or, did anybody not give their best effort? Can they, give a little bit better effort in the second game? So I think that was, a more recent one is, okay, what went wrong? What could have gone differently? And how can you better prepare for the next 2 that are coming up? And don't let that failure defeat you for the rest of the day.
You're looking at it and saying, well, this is an opportunity for growth. How can you learn? What will you do differently? And so you're looking ahead and thinking about how does this change you?
As a coach, I have lots of quotes, of course. Most of us coaches have this like bank of quotes that we use. Yeah. So there's actually one, Winston Churchill. Okay. He said, success is not final. Yeah. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Right. And so I think in those moments too, it's, whether it's a success, which feels good. Yeah. Tomorrow's another day. Right. And so we've got to continue striving. One success is not a lifelong success necessarily. Right. But then also the failures will come too. Do we get back up and keep trying? Do we keep on continuing? And it does take courage. So that's one of the quotes I'll throw out there as a coach sometimes, and so. And
I remember watching, Chris, who's a coach in Central, coach. At first it was girls he was coaching, and he'd often say, especially when the kids wouldn't get their free throws, he'd just say, short memory, keep going, right? And that's a big part of it too, because we often sort of like live in the past. Like once we've had a failure, we keep thinking about the fact that we failed and why we failed and how we failed. And then at that point, we've lost the ability to look ahead and actually just forget, be okay with the fact that happened. It's over. It does not actually define me. And we have this, on Sundays we play Frisbee, and there's this pattern where we have 4 teams, and then so 2 teams play each other, and then whoever the winners, we call them, the winners play the losers, right?
Yeah.
And I remember one Sunday, you know, somebody yelling out, well, who are the losers? You know? And I think
I'm the loser.
And I reacted by saying, I'm just one of the people who lost, you know?
That's
and
right.
then one of my students who I know pretty well looked at me, she said, Mrs. Natalie, I remember you told us actually the failure doesn't define us, you know? And I thought it is true, because there's a difference between saying, I am a loser and I lost, or I failed versus I am a failure, right? Because I failed just means I had this goal, I didn't achieve it, but it doesn't mean that that is who I am. That's just what happened in that moment.
From a biblical Christian worldview, you know, a lot of our listeners, I think, are Christian families, and, you know, realizing the truth that it says in the Bible that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and that, you know, I think in Ephesians it says that, you know, God created us in Christ Jesus to do good works, and that, you know, God doesn't create mistakes. He doesn't create failures. But that doesn't mean that we won't fall short, right? I mean, I think elsewhere in the Bible it says in Romans, you know, we all fall short, right? And so, you know, obviously, whether it's a sin, it's a loss, it's I mean, we know for sure those failures are going to come, but we also are reassured in God's truth that those failures don't define us. We don't find our value in the one thing that we're good at. And if that one good thing doesn't go well, there's nothing else to live for. Everything's gone. Everything's lost. So.
Yeah. And I like how I mean, it's true. The Christian worldview really says that every human being is failing and will fail, and to a degree is a failure, because apart from Christ, we have no hope, we have no success, we have no work that we can cling to. But we kind of live in a culture where we're always talking about what I do well, you know, what I've accomplished, like how awesome I am. And so, we're fighting against something that is constantly telling us we should trust ourselves. And one of the things that we learn, I think, through failure is that, well, I do make mistakes, and I will not hit the mark at some point. And so either that makes me very low, or that helps me to understand, I'm human, but I have a God who's over all this and who works these things out for good, that there is a purpose in this failure. And I guess I wonder about, you talked a little bit about lessons. So maybe from your own life, do you have a circumstance that you can think back and think, really from the outside, this would have appeared like a failure or a moment when I failed, but that maybe years later you could look back and say, no, that was used for great good, and I wouldn't wish myself not to have experienced that failure?
I've got an example. I've got lots of examples, but I've got one that comes to mind, I think. So when I was a youngster, when I was in middle school and in high school, I really had my sights set on playing sports in college. And so I just, you know, there were a few older kids when I was in middle school that I saw go off to college, and they signed a letter, and it was publicized, and it was a big deal, and people celebrated them. And so, of course, you know, from a young age, I looked up to them, and I thought, they're playing for a college team. And that was a big deal. And so that was a goal of mine, you know, coming through middle school up into high school. And for me, the dream was American football, actually. I loved American football. I played basketball. I played baseball. American football was the most fun, and I was pretty good at it. And so I wanted to, you know, follow, you know, some older guys that were a couple years older than me that went off to college. So my senior year, you know, my whole, you know, junior and then summer in between my junior and senior year, moving into senior year, like all of my focus and attention is like getting my body in perfect shape, making sure the team is there at all of our, you know, like preseason, all of our summer workouts and stuff, because like really it was selfish. Like, this is my time to shine, and I'll shine better if everybody else around me is good too. And you know what I mean? So that was like, you know, it consumed my thoughts, it consumed my spare time, and even time that I probably should have spent in other areas was, you know, directed toward making sure I got into a college football program. And so needless to say, the very first game of my senior season, I got injured. My collarbone broke. And so that in some ways, you know, maybe that's not my fault. Maybe, you know, just a big heavy guy fell on me and it ended up, but the dream, the goal was not realized in, you know, American sports. If you're hurt your senior year, you know, they'll start looking elsewhere. And so that dream was dashed. And so even though maybe the circumstance was out of my control, right? I maybe couldn't have prevented that injury from happening. You know, my goal, my dream, I was a failure in that regard, right? I wasn't going to go on to college and play football anymore. And so, this is actually a huge part of my Christian testimony, but I knew who God was. I wasn't walking closely with Jesus at that time, but I was so upset. I was so mad. How could this be? God, if you're real, how could you let this happen? And so, I won't spend too much of this time explaining, but feeling all the feelings and, just what do I do now? Right. Because my whole identity is tied up in this one thing.
Yes.
And so, fast forward down the line, I'm also a baseball player. I meet a guy at a Christian college, which I had no intention of going to a Christian college at that time. And he was on the baseball team. Hey, you should think about coming. This was Corbin University. You should think about coming to Corbin. Maybe you could play on the baseball team. Right. And so anyway, my dream of playing college football at a secular school, not a Christian university, was gone and dashed. And I ended up almost begrudgingly going to Corbin. And baseball, and it's fine. I like it. I'm kind of good at baseball too. It wasn't my dream. So but that's, a failure. And so at Corbin, I'm surrounded by Christian mentors. I'm surrounded by Christian friends. I'm playing on the baseball team. I'm being coached by Christian men. I have brothers on the team that are, surrounding me with encouragement and support. I learn of SPH. I learn of Indonesia. I met my wife at Corbin. And so, what I, as an 18-year-old, viewed as a failure, turned out, God was all over it. I mean, his hands were absolutely at work, helping me to get to where I needed to be and where he knew I was going to be in order to meet my wife and have, friends that I still call friends today that I will call when I'm, struggling with something or whatever, that'll give me encouragement and support. So that failure totally altered the course of who I am today, who my wife is and where I've lived for 9 years. And so that's one specific example I can think of. I can also think of plenty of examples where, I haven't grown. I haven't learned much. I think you mentioned a little bit too, when we fail, kind of have a choice to make, right? Am I going to blame everybody else? Am I going to blame the circumstances? Am I going to blame the weather? Am I going to blame my parents for making me study instead of practice for that sport? There are so many people to blame. I also have a choice to take some responsibility. And I think that's one of the areas where when I haven't learned from my failures, it's because I've blamed everybody else, or I've blamed the circumstances, or I've made up all these reasons and excuses why that failure happened. And where I've learned the most from failures is when I, what did I do? What didn't I do? What could have I done? How could I have prepared differently or better? Who could have I asked for help? So I think so much of our failure is or so much of my personal failure has been when I've just relied on myself, my strength, my will, when, like you said, we are going to fail. We're going to fall short. And it's in those times where I've failed. And then in the next opportunity, relied on others, asked for help, or most importantly, probably ask God to be involved in the process with me. That's it. God, walk this through with me. Help me to be able to put my best foot forward, but for your glory. And it's in those times where obviously God has helped me to not always succeed, but to have that perspective that's needed in order to fail forward.
Yes. Or fail well. Right. And to grow. Yeah. And I really like how you talked about identity, because when we fall into the trap of thinking that everything that we do is about how it appears or how it's perceived or if we have achieved the standard that we hoped for, then it kind of ends with us, right? And so we take the blame or we take the credit. But when you put it in the perspective of, that God allowed your injury to make you think, wait, what is my life? Who am I? How do I define myself as a person? Is it just based on this sport? I remember I went through a season where I was singing like in university. And so it was my only year. My degree was in biology, but then I loved to sing. So for 1 year I went and did a performance diploma. And so all I got to do was sing and I loved it. But I was surrounded by people who really did define themselves only by the fact that they were singers, and life ebbed and flowed. You'd have an audition and one girl would get the part and the other girl wouldn't. And it was, the drama was intense. And I remember it was God teaching me that I could actually honestly say, if I wake up tomorrow and I cannot sing, my life will not be over. But actually almost everybody I knew that wasn't true of. I was able to look in and realize, well, this is just one part of who I am. It's a gift, like you said, that I've been given to glorify God with, but it's not who I am. It's part of how God made me.
So much of this whole conversation does depend on how do we define a success and how do we just define a failure.
Right.
And what is a success or failure to me perhaps different than what is a success or a failure to you. Right. Talk about singing, right? I like to sing too, but I'm not a professional singer, right? And so, I get up on a stage at a teacher talent show and I, hit a couple notes right. That might be a success for me, actually. Right. You get up on a stage and sing and you hit a couple notes wrong. That might be a failure for you, even though you hit 98% of the notes right.
Yeah.
So, and I do, there's a definition for success that I have just clung to. It's not mine. And I'm actually going to read this one just to make sure I get it exactly right. But this was a basketball coach, UCLA, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He's one of the most winningest coaches in college basketball history. He won 10 national championships. His name's John Wooden. And if anyone could define success by winning and losing, it could have been this coach because he won all the time, right? So his definition of success is a peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to become the best you are capable of becoming. And so that really individualizes success.
Yes.
I am successful when I have this peace of mind in knowing I did everything that I could do in order to prepare for this moment.
Right.
And so when the world looks at, did you win, did you lose? As parents, did you win? Your kid gets home from the game. Did you win?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a natural question to ask. And we hope they did, right? We want to celebrate with them. But it individualizes success to the point where, okay, if I'm coaching a team, and that's part of the reason I love to coach team sports, right? And I actually I know everybody loves to come and watch the games. I love practice.
Yeah.
I like coaching in games, but once the game starts, I don't have a lot of control anymore, right? It's just the kids that are on the floor and I can yell and scream. But I love practice because at practice sessions, I have total control of those practice sessions, right? The kids are still the ones doing the work. They're still the ones running the drills. But I have the privilege of stopping practice every time I need to stop it, rehash something, talk about something. And so it's this process of preparation, right? And so when I'm coaching team sports, sometimes it'll be game day and all the kids are talking about, oh, we're going to crush this team. We're way better than this team, right? And sometimes we're overconfident. Maybe that week of practice leading into that game because we thought it was an easy one. We don't perform well. We're not prepared well. And we lose a game like that, right? And so the conversation in the locker room after a game like that, how did we prepare? Okay, we should have won, but you don't put one piece of paper next to another piece of paper and have the basketball game played on the paper, which team is supposed to be better. You go on the court, you get in between the lines and you actually play the game. And so, the conversation with the team after a game like that is, how did we prepare this week? Right? So it's not necessarily the failure is the scoreboard.
No.
We lost the game. It stings. It's disappointing. Yeah, maybe we should have and could have won.
Yeah.
But what was our preparation like this week? Did we prepare well? The opposite situation is when we have prepared well. We have had a great week of practice. We've been working our tails off. Everybody is, we're gelled as a group. We run the plays that we designed to run. And we lose. Right. The team that we played was maybe bigger than us, stronger than us, faster than us. Maybe they were more skilled than us. Now we're an international sports conference. Maybe they're from a different country than us. That basketball is just a more popular game and they play more often. So, okay, we prepare really well and we lose. Is that a failure? I mean, in some regards, you didn't win. So if you lost, you failed the goal. The goal is to win. But did our preparation get us to the point where we are actually competing at the best level that we're able to compete?
Yes.
And how disappointed in ourselves can we really be if we have self-satisfaction in knowing that we did everything that we could to prepare for this moment? And so, there's a little bit of a different conversation after a game like that. I was like, listen, you guys did everything that we coached you to do. You worked as hard as you could. Winning is still way more fun than losing. I'm not going to stand up here and say, this feels good to lose. However, you guys really did do everything that you could do. And then, on the flip side of that one, we lose that game that we maybe could have and should have won. Hey, let's learn. Sometimes another coachism, sometimes you win, sometimes you learn, right? What can we learn? Because a lot of times we can actually learn more from those moments, those situations.
Yes.
How can we prepare ourselves better in the future than when we win? Because when we win, we celebrate and it's fun and we love it. And I always coach to win. I will never coach to lose. I love to win.
Yeah.
But when you win, you celebrate, you go home, and you high five everybody, and then you don't think too much more about, except for that good feeling, right? When you lose, that does cause us to pause and reflect and see what changes need to be made. So
and then there's that feeling of disappointment, which I feel like it's inseparable with failure, right? That concept that, I mean, I heard you just a couple of weeks ago talking about a student and how it's easy to get in the place where your disappointment level with yourself is so high that you're actually not even seeing yourself accurately anymore, right? Can you talk a bit about that? How do you walk through, maybe real failure, but getting kids, whether it's your own child or one of your players, to see that the more disappointed you get in yourself, the harder it's going to get. So, how do you work through that?
Yeah. It's not easy. I'll tell you that. I think, player discouragement, team discouragement, hardship, and it's not always on the court, right?
No.
Sometimes it's family issues. Sometimes it's academic stuff that's kind of getting in the way. And so, discouragement is never an easy one to walk through with kids. But when it comes to how do they see themselves? Do they see themselves through the eyes of Jesus Christ, where they are made with eternal value? Do they see themselves as a basketball player only? Do they see themselves, as parents? Do I see myself as a father only? Because I fail often as a father as well. Do I see myself, for professionals, do I see myself as a professional only? Or is my life multifaceted? Am I created in the image of God? Do I have eternal value and worth? I think for me, that's what it usually comes back to with these kids. And sometimes they believe it and sometimes they don't. And I really hope they do eventually believe it if they don't already. But it's, hey, you missed a lot of shots in that last game. That doesn't feel good. No. I've been there. I've missed a lot of shots, or if it's an academic failure, a lot of times, even as coaches, the kids will come to us after a test day and they're really bummed and disappointed. And they don't want to go home because they know they're going to have to tell their parents, and their parents aren't going to be happy to hear. And so, in those moments, usually it is biblical truth reminders. This is how I see you, because this is how Jesus Christ sees you. This is how our God and Father in heaven sees you. He has designed you with gifts and talents. He has asked us in his word to use those gifts and talents to the best of our ability. But he's also told us in his word that he has gifted us differently. Right. And so, I think failure does, if not dealt with well, it does cause us to, try to hide, try to, wrap a shell around us, and because we don't want to be seen as a failure, right? We love to be seen as a winner. We love to be seen as someone who has a lot of success. So I think with my own kids, with kids at school, with kids on the team, it's just trying to remind them of biblical truth, if you believe the Bible to be true, and most of our kids say they do, like, okay, if you mean that, and you read this where God is telling us through his word that he loves us, he's created us with gifts and talents, he's created us each uniquely, he wants and desires the good for us when we love him and we strive toward, walking closely with his son Jesus. He wants us to, have success. He wants us to have joy. He wants us to have peace. But he also doesn't promise us that things are going to be easy. We're going to fail.
And also, I love how you talk about being relatable, because when you say to a kid, a lot of your shots didn't go in, and then you follow that up with, I've been there, that means a lot, right? Because you're a coach, so you're not actually just saying, oh, that was really hard to watch. You're actually saying, I was the player. I shot the shots that didn't make it in. I'm not just saying this. I know, I understand. And I believe that as a kid, if my parent ever acknowledged the fact that, I had hard moments, I, applied for something and didn't get it or got rejected, I failed on a test that I expected I would succeed on. That also helps, really, because it reminds our kids that even their parents are, we make mistakes. We see failure. We experience failure probably more often than we acknowledge it to them, right?
Yeah,
but when we do, it normalizes it. It helps them
right.
not to feel like I just keep having to strive and I'm not quite making it, right?
And that's where I think it does take some courage as parents to admit those failures to our kids sometimes, right? Whether it's me admitting it to the basketball boys or admitting it to my 8-year-old, my 9-year-old, my 5-year-old, because as parents, we make mistakes, right? And it is hard to stand in front of my kids and apologize to them for a mistake that I've made. But I have found that to be some of the most precious family moments that we've had. And I know my wife, Amanda, will do the same thing at times. We, as parents, we want our kids to look up to us.
Yeah.
How much more might they look up to us if we walk through our failures with them at times, and allow them to experience, an apology from us, or even maybe it's not an apology from us to them, but it's a failure at work. Hey, I planned this. It was supposed to go a certain way and it didn't. Oh, but what did you do, Dad? What are you going to do next? Right? I'm like, well, I'm going to, with your help and with God's help and with Amanda's help, I'm going to stand back up on my feet and I'm going to go to work tomorrow and I'm going to try to do better for my next project, or I'm going to try to. So I think them seeing us fail well, it probably speaks more, to be honest, even if it's not their failure, it's ours, because that might help them to be a little bit more prepared for their next failure. Yeah. Because they've seen it in us. They've seen it modeled by us. So.
And I love that phrase, what are you going to do next? Because actually that's really what we're talking about, because everybody's going to fail. So it's not that you failed and now we're really distraught because we knew that was coming. It's what are you going to do with that failure? And I think of Peter in scriptures, right? And such a powerful story of how Jesus told him ahead of time, you're going to deny me 3 times, before the rooster crows. And Peter, we talk about overconfidence and you talk about your team being overconfident. I mean, he was overconfident, right? He was, no way, I'm never going to deny you. And for Jesus to say, you're going to do this. And when you do this, he says, when you turn back, he says, strengthen the brethren, right? And he also tells them, and I've prayed for you that your faith will not fail. And often I think of failure and I think of Peter and I realize we do fail. We are like Peter. We do think we're not going to fail and then we do it anyway. And yet our God is so compassionate that not only is he going to do something good through it, but he's thought about it ahead of time. Like you're talking about preparation. He's preparing us for the reality that you are going to fall. And when you fall, I already have a strategy for you and I already have a purpose for you, and it's to bless others. And like you just said, I think if we're willing to be vulnerable and honest and acknowledge when we fail, it means that we can turn around and be an encouragement to others, and especially to our own kids, to say, this is normal. This doesn't make you less of a person. This doesn't make you less loved by God. This doesn't disappoint me because I know that God made you from the same flesh that every other human being was made from on earth. And we have failed and we will continue to fail. But what are we going to do next? What are we going to do? And I guess for me, the hope is that we have this God who is perfectly and in his great wisdom working through those failures for his glory. And so that we can somehow be more like Christ in and through it, right?
Yeah. And I think if we believe that he's sovereign, not only in our successes, but in our failures. And I think that's one thing that maybe we trick ourselves to think sometimes. Yeah. When we fail, God had nothing to do with it. Maybe it was only our fault, or it was everybody else's fault. It was the devil. Yeah. I think that God knows our failures. He knows when we are going to fail. I think it was also Peter that walked on the water for a while, but then also started to sink.
When his eyes weren't on Christ.
Jesus knew, right? He called him out of the boat and he took some steps and he's on top of the water, and then he took his eyes off of Christ and he started to falter and fail. Yeah. Jesus knew that would happen. Yeah. Jesus was there to help him not drown, help him to get back in the boat, help him to get safe to shore. And so I think if we truly believe God is sovereign in our success, God is sovereign in our failure, he has a plan when we fail. Yeah. And he works through those failures. And it's still a great mystery to me. Does God make us fail? Did he force us to fail? Did he know we were going to fail? And then he knew what the plan was after that. It's still so much of a mystery to me, but I know he knew the failure was going to come. Yeah. And he knew that there was going to be an aftermath and a path forward. And he places, those stepping stones for us we've got to take the next step, but he places the stepping stone there for us to continue toward walking more closely with him or getting back on track or going toward that goal. But if we trust that God is sovereign, then that's so helpful. And I think now, the stronger my faith has become, knowing that there is a purpose in the pain, there's a purpose in the failure. God will not only bring me through this, but he will lead me on toward better things, right? Things that he has planned for me. So,
well, and think about the character, right? Because the person that you described, the person you were with the goal of, I don't want to say just, but being a football player. You describe yourself in a very different light, right? And what he did in your heart to humble you and to place your identity in him rather than in your achievements, that made you who you are today, which is, his wisdom, like you said, and his sovereign plan, which we trust even when we don't understand. Which is very good. I was gonna read. There's this really cool quote from Thomas Edison, which he's the one who invented the light bulb. When he invented the light bulb, he actually said, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention of 1,000 steps," which I like, kind of like the stepping stone. But he also invented the phonograph, which became like the record player, and the motion picture camera, which became like a movie camera. So pretty incredible guy. But he had this huge explosion, like his factory where he was doing all his inventions actually spontaneously combusted when he was 67. And it was so spectacular that he called his son and said, "Go get your mom. I want her to see this. You'll never see something like this again." And then he was quoted to say, "There is great value in disaster. All our mistakes are burned up. Thank God we can start anew." And I thought, powerful words, right? Because there's also, God gives us new beginnings. It's not just that we are failures. It's that it's a clean slate. It's a new start.
Right. Yeah. That's an amazing story. I don't think I'd quite heard that story before, so that's new to me. But I think, every day the sun rises, right? And every day that it does, and the birds chirp in the trees, and, we have a fresh opportunity, to take that next step, right? Whether we're currently experiencing a failure or, things are going really well. The same guy that I quoted earlier, John Wooden, one of his most famous quotes too is, "Build a shelter against a rainy day by the life that you live." So in other words, the sun is shining. What are you doing to prepare for when that rainy day comes, right? And I think so much of that from a Christian perspective is heart preparation, right? I don't want a failure to come. I don't want a hardship to come. I don't want anything wrong to happen. But we know that we live in a fallen world. I will make mistakes, so will you. And our circumstances will change sometimes in a matter of moments, right? And so how have I prepared my heart? How have I prepared my family? How have I prepared my basketball team to go through a rainy day? What type of shelter have we built? You build a shelter when the sun is shining, right? You don't, once the rain starts, there's no more shelter building. Like whatever you have set up is what's going to be set up, right? And so I think that's, one of those things. And maybe Thomas Edison had a similar perspective too. Like things are going to blow up, right? Like literally going to blow up sometimes. Is that the end? Right. Or is it a fresh start? Is it a fresh beginning? Can we pick ourselves back up and march forward? Do we have the courage to continue? And
praise God that he's the one who lifts us up. Because if we had to lift ourselves up, we'd probably be stuck on the floor.
That's right. Yes, for sure.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really awesome chatting with you and just hearing more of your stories. And I know, being a mom of kids who play sports and have been on your teams, that, there's just real power in a coach and a coach's ability to speak truth into the lives of players. And so it's awesome for me to hear a little more about.
And if I can give just one more encouragement to parents or coaches or even teachers or whoever, adults that are placed kind of in authority over, young lives. I think sometimes we might think, and I know I'm guilty of this too, like if I tell my child or tell my basketball player, like, you have failed, you're a failure, and somehow that's going to make them better, right? You are a failure, and then you are a failure, and then you are a failure, and then somehow my kid is just going to figure things out and all of a sudden come out of that failure pattern. I don't think that's really the right approach for these kids, right? We can, I think, sympathize, empathize with kids in their failures to say, like, this doesn't feel good, does it? what can we do to move forward? But I think we really do have to be really careful as parents, as coaches, as teachers. Okay, the child has failed.
Yeah.
And it's true. He has failed.
Yeah.
Whatever he was working on didn't come to fruition.
Yes.
Whatever the goal was didn't happen. We can call that a failure,
Yes.
right? Like when you're on the ultimate Frisbee pitch, you can say winners and losers because it's true.
Sure.
In sport, there is a winner, there is a loser.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're a loser, but you did lose. So in that
yeah.
moment, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you failed. I have influence over you.
Yeah.
And so how can I, and this is the thought process, right? How can I walk with you through this situation to where you are going to be better for it, right? Because if I just belittle you, if I just yell at you, if I just tell you you're a failure time and time again and think somehow magically that's going to flip a switch in you, I don't think that's, in my experience so far, that hasn't really worked. And so I think, how can we speak Jesus into that moment? How can we speak the gospel into that moment? We've all sinned. We've all fall short. The good news of Jesus Christ is that he's ready to pick us up. He has reached down and he is pulling us up, and we have an opportunity to move forward with him, walking closely with him by the power of his Holy Spirit, right? And so that's just my encouragement to the parents, the teachers, the coaches that are out there. When, and it will happen, when the kids fail, how can we walk with them through those moments? And how can we, place, help, God places those stepping stones. But I think as coaches and teachers and parents, we can also place those stepping stones and try to walk with our kids. Hey, what's the next step? What's the next thing we can do? How can we get back up on our feet?
Yeah, absolutely. And those words of truth and encouragement, I think, have so much power. And that's why kids come back, because they want to hear that. They want to hear the truth rather than, the truth that you're a failure. There is truth to it, but we need hope. We can't be stuck in that moment. So thank you for sharing those words of hope, and thank you for your heart for our kids, for students, and of course your own kids as well.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us on Rooted Parenting. I'm here to help you to honor God as a parent and to raise your kids to know and to love Jesus. If you enjoyed the podcast, we'd love it if you'd subscribe. We release one new episode every month. Also, feel free to share with a friend. We want to be able to equip, inspire, and encourage parents. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking with Scott and Helen Schlepper about making your own family culture. See you next time.